Hello, and welcome to our fourth episode of Morrowind's Abandoned Projects, taking a look at the lost and forgotten mods of Morrowind, left in an incomplete state by the original authors, waiting for someone or someones to pick them up again and maybe finish them and release them in a complete state someday. And today we're going to be taking a look at the Imperial City of Cyrodiil by Rsawarhawk, and completing both the original 1.04 version that was released to the public in 2004, and also the updated version by Estoneburner released in, I think, 2010. Since that second update, there's been pretty much no activity on this mod, and we're going to be showcasing both versions here because, well, the changes made in the updated release might not appeal to everyone, and someone looking to take over might want to start off with the original release. And either way, you'll find links to both of them down in the video description below, so let's go ahead and get started with our showcase here. Now, this is quite obviously one interpretation of the Imperial City of Cyrodiil, and we're going to, just start out right in the actual Imperial City here. And one of the things you're going to notice is that this really looks nothing at all like Oblivion's design of the Imperial City, or really any of the different attempts at recreating the capital city of the Empire over the years. Now you have to keep in mind that this mod was released originally in 2004, long before Oblivion came out, and long before we really had any, concept art of the Imperial City. So yes, this really does, look a bit different from what you might expect, with retextured Cyrodiil buildings and canals, and the White Gold Tower is really more of a fort than a tower, really, though it does sort of have a white gold color scheme going on. And again, all we really knew in 2004 was that the White Gold Tower was, called the White Gold Tower. So the design here can be forgiven somewhat given the historical pretext. And while we're at it, it should be noted that this vision of the Imperial City has no relation to any of the major projects involving Cyrodiil. Obviously, it has nothing to do with the province Cyrodiil, as that project wasn't started until about 2007. And given the 2004 date, it even predates the Dawn of Oblivion mod, of which the only real thing to be released was Princess Stomper's City of Leowyn. And as far as I know, this was just one of a couple of independent attempts at building the Imperial City over the years, not really associated with a larger project. And personally, I could have sworn there was, another mod that added the Imperial City. I seem to remember playing a very dense urban alpha build of the Imperial City back in, 2004 or 2005, that used a common Imperial architecture, but I can't really find any references to it anymore, and it doesn't seem to be on Morrowind modding history, so that one was probably just, lost to time. But anyway, focusing on Warhawk City here, as we'll see in a bit, in addition to the central Imperial City Island, there's also a ring of land, supposed to be the Cyrodiil Mainland, that goes around to Lake Rumere, but it doesn't really extend very far, and perhaps it was intended to be incorporated into a larger project, but I don't really know. And as it stands, it provides a ring of forested mainland to explore, which we'll see here in a minute after we, finish our visual tour of the Imperial City. And, speaking of, the actual city design of the Imperial City here is, well, a bit odd. For one thing, the actual city part of the city is entirely out on the water of Lake Rumere. None of it, except for the White Gold Tower, is actually on land. The entire city is basically one large, single-layer square canal, which again just seems a bit odd to me. Cities aren't really built like this, with only one layer of buildings and canals surrounding a perfectly, suitable island that would be ideal to build upon. Really, the entire city design here is just incredibly unorganic, and not to be too critical, but, cities just don't pop up like this in the real world. The one exception is, of course, Venice, but that's kind of a special case. Venice was founded due to necessity, and as a refuge from, assault during the invasion first of the Huns, and later the Lombards when they invaded northern Italy. And the city of Venice survived precisely because it's not really the sort of place you'd expect to find a city. Given the terrain here with the Imperial City, this all just makes, very little sense. That's not to say it doesn't have its, qualities. If you were to ignore the fact that it's supposed to be in the Imperial City, it could pass as a pretty interesting city design. But the fact that it is, supposed to be the Imperial City rather undermines the feeling of awe one should feel when visiting the capital. I know, I'm being a bit, overly critical here. It really isn't a bad-looking city. I've seen much worse in my time of researching mods to showcase. But if someone does, end up picking this, old project up, they might just, want to consider some serious redesigns. Now, despite what I said before, the city isn't really a perfect square. Oddly enough, instead of the straight and wide stone canals found along most of the city streets here, one section of the city does seem to use wooden docks with narrow waterways instead, perhaps meant as a lower-class neighborhood. I'm not really entirely sure. Either way, the shape of these streets is a bit more, curved, with some areas being wider and others being more, rather compact and close together. And in any event, this is probably one of the more interesting parts of the city from a design perspective, though I still find the single layer streets surrounding the White Gold Tower to be a bit odd for a capital of the Empire. But now that we've gone around the city here, let's take a bit of a closer look at the White Gold Tower itself, and it's obviously a rather massive structure, surrounded by Imperial stone walls, with 2 drawbridges connecting it to the rest of the city here. The tower itself is a retextured Imperial style keep with white gold coloring, and obviously this design for the White Gold Tower is going to seem extremely foreign to us, since Oblivion came out in 2006, and if there's one thing that's sort of, stuck in everyone's imagination from that game is the, design of the White Gold Tower as a tall circular tower overlooking much of Cyrodiil. This rather more bulky, square, and rectangle style design probably seems just a bit absurd to us in the present, but again, keep in mind that when this mod came out, there was no real concept art of the White Gold Tower or the Imperial City. The author used what information he had, and, this was just a result from that. And again, like the city itself, it's not a bad-looking structure, though the texture work is perhaps a bit dated, and it does, make for an interesting landmark, as long as you, again, don't associate it with the Imperial City. To me, this seems like an ideal mod to perhaps, transform into something else. I mean, Province Cyrodiil will eventually be handling the Imperial City anyway. It might not be until 2090, but I imagine they'll get around to it in due time. So this project is, really something that could perhaps be made into something else. There's no one to say that this has to be the Imperial City after all. You could use it in your own, landmass mod of its own lore, or, what have you. But anyway, taking a look at the Cyrodiil mainland here, which is really more of a ring island going around Lake Rumere and the Imperial City. This is a fairly nice and scenic, sort of forest terrain, utilizing, I believe, what are these? Are these modified nidib trees? I think they are, though they might be from some other resource now that I, take a closer look at them. But either way, there's not a whole lot of landscape detail in here. You basically have a fairly sizable forested landmass with a road going in a complete circle. Just a few paths, just branching off here and there. You'll notice the occasional set of rocks or flowers, but for the most part, there's just, trees here. And the level of detailing here is really just fairly minimal here. There's also only about 1 or 2 actual new locations in this forest. The rest is again just trees without a whole lot of clutter or detailing. That said though, the overall landscape design is pretty good, I think. You've got fairly decent terrain smoothing, and overall it looks, fairly natural. You don't have a bunch of terrain spikes like in some other landmass mods from around 2004. And real quick, there is one notable landmark in this forest, a castle located along the northern edge of the ring road, which is quite scenic looking, but unlike the rest of the Cyrodiil mainland here, it's fairly bare bones. The base has been established, but there's no exterior detailing or clutter really. It's just a castle in the woods at the moment. Though I do believe just about every building in this mod does have a basic interior layout so far, which is rather useful for any, would-be modders or team of modders to take up and to finish. Though I did notice that some of these interiors were not actually, grid-snapped, so they may need, some minor adjustments or whatnot. And anyway, we're next going to be taking a look at the 2010 version of the Imperial City released by Estoneburner. And obviously right away you'll notice that the city has been massively overhauled, with lots more detailing and clutter, as well as maybe a couple hundred NPCs now roaming the streets here. I do need to apologize for the FPS here. The 2010 version is quite heavy on FPS, and you're going to notice some massive dips in this video. You're also going to notice the occasional floating object, and missing mesh, and missing texture here and there, because this mod was not packaged properly, and is clearly, missing some assets that were used here. And this is one of the reasons why I want to showcase this, separately, because depending on whether or not you want to pick up this mod, you may want to start with the more base version and create your own vision, rather than, relying on the started work of someone else and having to fix all these new issues, like, missing textures and all that. And one of the other things you'll find here is a massive number of resources from Mighty Joe Young's various resource packages, which, while they add a variety to the city here, can be a bit of a problem since some of the models in these packages aren't particularly, well optimized, and some of them are, clearly a bit dated, since Mighty Joe Young released most of this stuff between 2003 and 2005. That said, they do help the city look a bit more, dynamic and organic than the original version released by Rsawarhawk, despite some obvious issues that they have, including the numerous missing textures that you're bound to run into. And we're just going to fly around here a bit more, so you can get an idea of what the city looks like from the 2010 update. And on the whole, I'd say the design here is just a lot better, assuming you ignore the technical issues. though frame rate is going to be a bit of a problem. You could probably, improve that a bit by removing some of the NPCs. I'm pretty sure this mod doesn't use path grids anyway, and actually trying to travel by foot around the city is currently a bit of a hassle. And regardless of which of these two versions you prefer, this is certainly an interesting project, and one that could realistically be taken up by a handful of modders. Though again, personally, I wouldn't try and keep it as the Imperial City. There's just too many differences from what we know from lore and what we would expect in the design of a capital city for this to just really work as an Imperial City mod. But it could, be used as a new city or landmass in another project, or just, renamed and retitled to something else. And for those wondering about conflicts, we haven't shown this mod on the map here because it doesn't actually show up on the map. All I can say is that it's a fair bit southeast of the Tamriel Mainland. So it won't conflict with Tamriel built in its current state, though it probably will still conflict with something, just due to how, crowded the seas of Morrowind are. And in any event, if you'd like to take up this mod yourself, in either of the two forms currently available, it's open to be claimed, and perhaps one day we'll see a finished mod out of this. But until then, that pretty much wraps up today's episode here. As always, we'll be back in about a month, and next time we'll be exploring the famous yet very much incomplete landmass mod, Frankenfell. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.